I've heard of Roy Smith, but once you hear his story, you will never forget him. Roy Smith wanted nothing more than a simple, peaceful life, and he thought he had found that in the majestic mountains of Colorado. But the beauty surrounding him was no match for the ugliness he encountered there. His is one of the most compelling civil rights cases in years, and we bring it to you exclusively tonight. Connie Chung has a story that will echo in America's conscience. Welcome to Roy Smith's America.
There isn't anybody in the United States that ought to be treated in the fashion that Roy was treated.
He was just a decent, independent fellow who loved his home up there, but was the victim of a campaign of terror.
He was our only black, and so people called Nigger Roy. Right or wrong, that's what happened.
Roy Smith doesn't live here anymore. His fears won't let him. On this day, he returned to Gilpin County, Colorado, only after we guaranteed his safety. For 20 years, these mountains were his home. Now, his cabin sits in ruins.
All this happened when people tore it up. It was really trashed out.
For years, Roy Smith repeatedly claimed he was the victim of brutal, racially motivated crimes, violent assaults that local authorities did little or nothing to investigate. Left unprotected, Smith fled for his life.
I knew that these people eventually was going to kill me, and they was bad men protecting evil men.
They were neighbors, he claims, tormented him.
Well, Mr. Smith claimed they tried to murder him, tried to run him over. That's murder to me.
There were officers who failed to protect him. The record shows that you didn't believe Roy Smith.
That's correct.
There was racism and humiliation.
Roy Smith never asked you to call him Nigger Roy, did he?
But there were lawyers who helped Smith fight back.
I thought, my God, this is happening in America. This is still happening in America. This is happening in Colorado.
I remember back in '59.
Growing up in Mississippi, Roy Smith vividly remembers the ugly face of American racism. He witnessed cross-burnings, lynchings, and is still haunted by the memory of one atrocity.
The little black 9 or 10-year-old child was stretched out, and campfire was built in his stomach.
A campfire was built on his stomach.
Right.
I'm one of the blacks that got away.
Before he was 8, barely able to read or write, Smith fled the South and became a drifter, living what he calls the hobo life. He traveled the rails and in the mid-70s came to Colorado, settling into the hills outside Central City, an old gold mining town an hour west of Denver. It was a harsh life. There were nights he slept under trees, poor and hungry.
I eat whatever I could find off the land.
Like other mountain men, Smith became a cowboy and a gold miner, taking odd jobs, working in mines, and scratching a living, panning for tiny nuggets of gold.
Roy Smith, to me, was a real gentle person.
Dan Wall and Jim Hutchinson were Roy Smith's neighbors and his friends.
I think a lot of people might have looked down their nose and wondered, what the hell is he doing up here?
3,300 whites in the county and only a handful of blacks didn't stop Smith from eventually moving into this remote cabin. It had no electricity, no telephone, no running water. And without a car, he traveled miles on foot. But to Smith, it was home. What was it about the mountains and where you lived that you loved so much?
All I know is something that seemed like freedom up there.
For a brief moment, in the midst of such beauty, Roy Smith believed the terror of Mississippi was behind him. But he was wrong.
There was a few people that didn't like Roy Smith. He had more bruises and lumps on him than somebody took baseball bats or boards or something to him.
The crimes were relentless. On roads or near gold mines, strangers in trucks jumped out and beat him with boards or baseball bats and called him nigger. Later, his home was vandalized, dynamite thrown at him, and acid poured on his clothes.
I had a lot of bad things happen. I don't know how to measure them. I never stopped to think of which is the baddest.
Wounded and often bleeding, Smith would walk miles into town to this clinic where Dr. Eleanor Christensen treated him for at least 20 injuries.
He told me the circumstances under which the injuries occurred, and he also told me he had stopped at the sheriff's office on the way to the clinic each time to report these incidents.
Smith filed complaint after complaint, frequently identifying potential suspects and their vehicles, leads he assumed would be followed up. Under Sheriff Bain, Roy Smith says that he brought you a baseball bat that someone hit him with. Did you ever examine that baseball bat for blood or fingerprints?
No.
It was the beginning of a pattern. Many of Smith's charges were never written up. Others were left unsolved or closed due to lack of evidence.
The sheriff's department never contacted me, and the fact they didn't believe him, I find incredible.
Tell me about this. These are the mirrors that you've put up?
These are just...
Roy Smith says he lived in a constant state of fear, so frightened that he set up his own security system.
You can look in this mirror here, and it'll let you know if somebody's coming up this road here.
This is the way you protected yourself.
This is the way I protected myself.
But in the darkness, he felt most vulnerable. Many nights he hid in this water tank at the bottom of the hill.
I was there, but I wasn't sleeping. I was too afraid to sleep.
But Smith says the days were no better. Around town, he became a caricature, people degrading him with racial slurs. Then one name became permanent. How did you feel about being called Nigger Boy?
I felt dirty and low and uncleanable.
People come up, hi, Nigger Boy, how you doing? That's how primitive we're talking.
John Holland is a Denver attorney who would eventually represent Smith.
He knew he had to take that kind of stuff there, because that's what people, that was the role they'd given him. That was the status he was placed in.
In the spring of 1992, Smith was involved in a wage dispute over some handiwork he had done for his neighbor, Robert Berube, who lived only a few yards down the road. Suddenly, over the next several weeks, Smith says he was attacked not once, but 5 separate times by Berube's dogs.
Is this man preaching gospel? I mean, so Mr. Smith says. Aren't it all? So what? Bob Berube says he's full of baloney.
Have your dogs ever bitten anyone?
To my knowledge, never.
Never?
Never. I mean, did they try to bite you when you came in?
No.
No.
We didn't have trouble that day.
Hey, Chester, you didn't get...
But others besides Roy Smith feared Berube's dogs.
Every time I went up there, or my wife went up, I kept a loaded .357 Magnum laying in the front seat just for those dogs.
They eat me up enough, I got the proof. My body carries it and its back shows it.
In fact, these photos of Smith's legs show some of his bite marks. The clinic's records are full of entries of multiple puncture wounds to his ankles, thighs, and even his stomach. Berube did receive a few minor tickets, a mere slap on the hand, and he did plead guilty.
All we wanted to do is get it over with.
And you paid medical bills as well.
Yeah, that's what we did.
You told Sheriff Hartman that on one occasion Roy Smith deliberately opened your fence so that the dogs could come out and bite him.
I believe somebody lifted the fence, and the only person that I can think of that would do that would be Roy Smith.
You don't really believe that, do you?
You just want to let him loose again so we get another complaint against us.
Sheriff Hartman, do you really believe that Roy Smith would lift a fence and allow dogs to bite him?
Very bizarre things happen. Is it possible? Yes. Did he do it? I don't know.
Bruce Hartman took the white man's belief over the black man's word.
Case closed?
Case closed.
Several months later, on the night of August 3rd, 1992, Roy Smith was walking near this road. He had just set up a freshly painted yard sale sign when suddenly he heard a car approaching from behind him.
The lights was going up and down because it was hitting these bumps and it was a rough road. So they just kept bouncing. And I knew the car was going pretty fast.
The car was headed straight for him. Smith ran behind his sign and some boxes as the car rammed into him. Then the car backed up, and with its engine revving, came at Smith again. He saw the license plate number, and he heard a voice.
The voice said to him, "You mother nigger, you goddamn mother niggers are all over the place." Screamed it at him.
Did he recognize that voice?
He thought it was Mr. Berube.
His neighbor.
His neighbor.
There was no question that whoever it was trying to run over me and hurt me real bad.
Right here is where the sign was at.
The next morning, a deputy arrived at the scene after Smith called the sheriff's department.
And I told him I was going to protect this evidence if I give my life to protect this evidence. Well, he looked off toward the mountain and he never even looked at none of the signs or nothing.
They gave the case instead to the State Highway Patrol. Trooper Derek Kemper says he was surprised by what the sheriff's department told him before he went out to the scene.
They said that the majority of the people in that particular area referred to Roy as the town nigger.
Trooper Kemper is as straight as an arrow. He sets immediately to work figuring out what happened. He develops a case. He listens to Roy's story. He assembles and photographs the signs. He photographed Roy Smith's knee.
And it matched up to a story of how the sequence of events went, and it was very credible.
The trooper then ran the license plate Smith had remembered. Whose license plate did it turn out to be?
Was my neighbor Robert Berrubi's up there turned out to be.
So I went up to Mr. Ruby's house. The vehicle was sitting there. I walked around the vehicle.
And he found paint on the bumper.
Of the very car.
On the very vehicle that he thought matched the paint on the signs, which still wasn't completely dry.
He found the evidence he wanted.
Which was?
Paint on the car and the damage from the signs to the car.
I also heard from dispatch that the owner of the vehicle was under suspension and didn't have a valid driver's license at the time.
In fact, Berrubi's license was revoked. Records show he had a drinking problem and admitted to blackouts. He was convicted twice for drunk driving, had spent time in jail, and if caught again, could have spent up to a year in prison. With the suspect and evidence, the trooper went back to Central City ready to obtain a warrant. But that never happened. The case was taken away from him and given back to the local sheriff.
They took the case away from Trooper Kemper. He said, well, I've got all the photographs. He turned it all over to them. They didn't blow up the photographs. They didn't look at the car. They never obtained a warrant. They didn't even go up to talk to Ruby for 26 days.
All I can recall that sheriff asking me was, did you try to run Roy Smith over last night? And I said, absolutely not. And I believe that was pretty much the end of the conversation. I don't think he went into any more.
He didn't ask you anything else?
No.
Didn't ask you about the red paint on your bumper?
He didn't even look at me. I didn't tell him I ran over the wood pile. He didn't ask me that. I wasn't going to voluntarily tell this man, hey, guess what, Sheriff? I just ran over Roy Smith's wood pile on purpose, and I'm under suspension on my license. I wasn't going to do that.
Did you try to run Roy Smith over?
Absolutely not.
Unbelievably, the case was officially closed for lack of evidence.
They didn't protect me and didn't try. So many things happen, you know, one on top of the other. Makes you feel like, what are you doing? Leave.
Well, that's what I was thinking. I was thinking, why didn't you just leave?
I had no way to leave. I had nothing to leave with. I just kept believing and hoping that someday it would let up and wouldn't happen no more, but it just kept happening.
And Roy Smith had no idea that the worst was yet to come.
When we come back, how far would his enemies go to drive Roy Smith out of town? The answer is hard to believe. So is the response of the local police. Connie Chung with the dramatic developments after this.
ABC News 2020 continues. Once again, Hugh Downs.
Roy Smith had gone to the mountaintop to find peace. Instead, he found hatred and violence. A black man targeted by white neighbors, abused and assaulted again and again. Why didn't the law protect him? Would his ordeal ever end? Well, as Connie Chung picks up the story, the answer, unfortunately, is not yet.
In October 1992, a few months after someone tried to run him over, Roy Smith says he was alone in his cabin, taking a bath in a barrel. Suddenly, from behind him, the door burst open, and someone threw a musty jacket over his head.
Then they grabbed me, one on each side of my shoulder somehow, and the other one lifted up my legs, and they strung me up.
3 men tied wire around Smith's legs, and then hanged him upside down naked with a rope they attached to a beam.
They said that if they had seen me with any white women, they would have took care of my family jewels.
And they had pliers.
Mm-hmm.
They took pliers to his scrotum, pulling on his testicles and threatening to castrate him. Finally, they fled, leaving Smith strung up by his ankles from the rafters of his house.
It was awful painful.
When you were hanging there by your feet, did your mind race back to Mississippi?
Mm-hmm. Went back to the hangings that I'd seen in the South. I was thinking that was the end. I've been through a lot of things, but the end has sure come up on me now.
In extreme pain, Smith thrashed his body enough to break the wire and get down. Barely able to walk, Smith waited 5 days before he went to his friend Jim Hutchinson for help.
I got so angry when he took off his boots and showed me his ankles. and you should see the cuts in his ankles from the wire that was wound around his leg. He was collecting his groin. I could see from his pants that he had a hell of a swollen area around his penis and his private parts, as he called it. And I said, well, Roy, you have to go back down to the clinic.
I don't know why I couldn't tell about the wire marks on my leg. I just couldn't break myself to tell her that.
You only asked her to treat your private parts.
I had to. There was no hope of surviving without her help in that way.
Roy rolls up his pants legs and he says, you need to look at that. And he shows me these wounds.
Even 2 years after the attack, John Holland could see the dark curved marks above Smith's ankles. Later, a forensic pathologist confirmed that Smith's scars were consistent with a hanging.
Could never forget. And there's no place you can hide or run to make it better.
Because you see the scars on your body.
Right. And when you see them all the time, and you see them even more so when you take a bath, they're there. I had water in my eyes because of the sadness of another human being would do such thing to another human being without a cause, without any cause at all, just because it's the wrong complexion. It makes you wonder why. Why did it happen?
Smith claims he reported the hanging to the sheriff's department, but no record was ever found. And then there was one final incident.
I saw some men moving around on the porch, and they were firing back across the meadow. And they were firing a hard-fired rifle. And I can hear those bullets ricochet.
I was walking up here, I heard a ricochet, and I saw the tree branch fall, which is right here.
Smith took off running. He claims the shots came from the direction of his neighbor, Robert Berube, the same man, he says, tried to run him over.
I was mad because he's shooting off that deck and he was drunk. You could see him staggering around on the deck up there.
Hutchinson called Sheriff Hartman, who came out with other deputies. But like so many times before, the matter was dropped. Hutchinson also told Sheriff Hartman about the hanging, but it was never investigated, never even written up. With that, Smith knew he had to leave Gilpin County.
It made me sad. In sadness, I could do nothing but go. It wasn't worth dying on. Worth trying to protect, but not dying. But I came to that decision.
I think Roy Smith thought he could die up there and no one would lift a finger.
John Holland and attorney Steve Miller and Bill Finger remember the day Smith walked into the office.
He'd pull his cowboy hat down, and he would never remove it when we first met with him. That was to hide who he was.
He was beaten down. He was wondering if he had any rights at all.
They convinced Smith that he did. So he fought back in federal court, filing a lawsuit against Gilpin County, the Sheriff's Department, and his neighbor, Robert Berube, charging them with racial discrimination, harassment, and violating his right to equal protection. The county denied it all, claiming officers showed no racial bias, but instead provided exceptional response to Smith's complaint.
They actually got a district attorney investigator saying that he'd reviewed the case and that in his opinion, Roy Smith had received exemplary law.
Exemplary?
Exemplary, right.
But Smith's lawyers found plenty of neglected evidence, such as medical records and the state trooper's report on the car assault. During pretrial questioning, officers began admitting they had lost evidence and made other serious mistakes.
These folks left tracks. They put out all-points bulletins for white people who complained of assault. Routinely, they took their leads and investigated them. Roy Smith, no all-points bulletin.
Sergeant Kent Edlund was in charge of the hit-and-run investigation, the one taken away from the state trooper and closed for lack of evidence.
It is preposterous to say that there was a lack of evidence in this case, based on what you know now and what you've seen. Isn't that true?
Define preposterous.
Incredible, ridiculous.
Knowing what I know now, yes.
There's all there to be had.
Yes.
So what does it take to register a racial hate crime? Mother niggers are all over the place. To a black man doesn't register as a hate crime with you?
As I stated before, we just had a class on that. Now it would, then it didn't.
And what about the hanging? Under questioning, Sheriff Hartman admitted he was near Smith's home when he learned months later about the alleged crime.
He knew right away that's very serious matter. Could be, yeah. You didn't go over to see Roy Smith to discuss this stunning information, did you?
No, I didn't go to Mr. Smith's house. So I recall we had several calls pending.
Did you have any cases that were more significant than a black man being hung upside down in his residence?
Did I have a case on that type of thing? No.
Okay, you consciously decided not to go there, didn't you?
I believe it was a conscious decision, yes.
I was shocked and stunned. The sheriff admitted that he made a conscious decision not to investigate the hanging of Roy Smith.
And then there was the charge of official racism. People around town called Smith racial names. But what about the sheriff's department?
All signed their names to a statement that none of them had ever called Roy Smith nigger boy.
Not one.
Not one.
John Bain is the undersheriff of Gilpin County. You have never called Roy Smith Nigger Roy.
No, it's not something that we made up in our office. It's not a label, if you were, that we ever assigned him.
But that's not what former Sheriff Rosetta Anderley remembers.
You are under oath, but if we're in front of a jury, did you hear Bruce Hartman, do you believe, call Roy Smith nigger boy? That's part of the everybody that did.
I'm sure he did.
John Bain?
They never called him Roy Smith. They only called him nigger boy. She admitted that.
Whether you had business or whether you were just talking, you called Roy Smith nigger boy. That's the name you used to describe him to other people. Isn't that true?
That would be true.
That was devastating. That meant that the sheriff's department had a policy of referring to him using racial slur.
And when they looked inside the sheriff's computer file, they made a startling discovery.
We just made him pull up the nickname file on the computer screen. There it pops out, Nigger Roy, Roy Smith, a.k.a. Nigger Roy. Roy Smith has never been a suspect in a case in his entire life.
He doesn't
He's
have
never
a
been
record?
accused. He's recordless. And I don't think law enforcement has the authority to racially brand an innocent victim.
Do you believe that that reference to Nigger Roy in the files is racial branding of Roy Smith?
It sure could be, yes.
Could be.
Well, yes, it is.
In a stunning pretrial opinion, the judge ruled that Smith's rights had been violated and called the sheriff's department's actions appalling and reprehensible. After that, it didn't take long for the county to settle. Roy Smith received $700,000. The road leading up to his house and past his neighbor Berube was named after him. And the sheriff's department wrote a letter of apology. Do you understand now how offensive it is and how wrong it is to refer to another citizen as a nigger?
I won't deny that, but it is also a reality in this not perfect world that many people did not know who Roy Smith was, that they in fact knew Roy Smith by this other name.
Sheriff Hartman, when is it okay for a white man to call a black man a nigger?
I don't believe it's ever okay.
The county took no action against the sheriff's department. No one was fired or suspended. They all kept their badges.
It's the worst pain of all, worse than any of the other ones. That's one I can't get over. I don't understand it.
What is the worst, Carl?
Is knowing that they still in office, they protected the evil men. For protecting them, they should have been thrown out of office.
In the end, Roy Smith was run out of town. He's not here anymore. Does that make you feel better?
It bothers me, yes. But I also know the reality of the profession I'm in. You can't make everybody happy all the time.
Smith's neighbor, Robert Berube, also settled.
Am I going to say I miss him now? No. No. But I wouldn't miss the white man either if he did the same things to me. I wouldn't miss a Chinaman. I wouldn't miss an Indian if they were doing the same things to my wife and I and our animals.
I have no hatred against none of the enemies that I had that I thought was my enemies. I don't hate either one of them. Hate ain't any good. It tears you apart. And only the hater loses.
Today, Gilpin County attracts gamblers and tourists, people who probably know nothing about what happened down this road. Roy Smith stayed in Colorado, but in another mountain town, where he says he feels safe.
Why should we care about what happened to Roy Smith? I'll throw a question back at you. Would you like it happening to you?
I don't think Roy Smith is an isolated example. It's made me realize how hard it still is to be black in America. He just wanted to bear witness that this couldn't be done to him.
What were you after?
I was after justice.
I'm one of the blacks that got away. Oh, I got away.
Connie, this man was horribly wrong. And yet he settled. Why didn't he go to court?
Roy Smith is not a vindictive man. Had he gone to court, individuals, meaning members of the Sheriff's Department, could have been held personally liable. And Roy Smith said he didn't want to take away their homes, the way he eventually lost his home. He said, I do not want to stoop to the level that they stooped to.
He was dogged in his pursuit of justice, but he didn't seem to want revenge.
No.
But even if he didn't want that, isn't it reasonable to think that somebody should have gone after the federal criminal aspects of this thing? You know, the civil rights violations.
Well, Roy Smith's lawyers did write to the U.S. Attorney in Denver and asked the U.S. Justice Department to pursue the case and even provided evidence, but nothing really ever came of that.
How's he doing now?
He's fine. He's living in Colorado in a city we can't disclose for his safety, and the local police chief told him he knows about his history, said, if anything ever happens to you, let me know, I'll take care of it.
Amazing if this could happen in this day and age, though, when you think of it.
That's right.
Thank you.